Yo, it's not a Professor X here, where my nickname is X, but I'm not a professor. Today I want to talk about the gaming industry and why they needed Astro Bot to win Game of the Year. But before I get into that, I do want to talk about the other nominees briefly and explain why, although they did win Game of the Year, all those games were massive successes and all deserve to be celebrated. Starting off, I want to start with the indie game, Balatro. This game was developed by one person in a studio they named Local Thunk. First of all, being an indie game eligible for Game of the Year is an insane honor to me, because just thinking about how an indie game is swapping hands for Game of the Year with massive AAA games. You know how they go now with quadruple A games. So a game made by one person with a limited budget even being here is absolutely amazing. And hopefully one day an indie game can win Game of the Year. Unfortunately, it wasn't this year, but I believe one day they might be able to do it. But for sure, this and the other indie games that were eligible in previous years are starting to show that these games are contenders for Game of the Year, and one year they might be able to steal it. Well, not steal it, they would earn it rightfully. But Balatro was Game of the Year from PC Gamer, so if that's any consolation prize, they might have not won Game of the Year from the Game Awards. They did win Game of the Year from somewhere, so still a major accomplishment, and the game sold very well, multiple millions. Next up is Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree. This game had a lot of controversy because it was a DLC that was eligible for Game of the Year. I can see why people were mad, because it sets a bad precedent, because a DLC of a game that won Game of the Year, winning Game of the Year, that would hurt for all the other nominees. And especially because it's kind of like you're getting a buff, because you already are a Game of the Year. So you're basically stacking on top of a game that was already Game of the Year, and you can basically win 2 awards on one game. So I can see why people were really upset at that. And just imagine if it did win, the president would have set, but it might have not won. But it even being a nominee shows developers now that if you make a DLC that's good enough, it can win Game of the Year. So people need to look into this, because DLCs might be getting a little bit more budget, because they might be able to win Game of the Year. And Game of the Year is really important, especially from the Game Awards, to all these companies and all these developers. And in my opinion, at first I was on the side of most of the people complaining. I thought having a DLC to win Game of the Year would be outrageous. It would be insane. It would literally be horrible for the gaming industry. Then I thought about it, and then I went to my mindset that I have currently. Well, competition is competition. If they win, they deserve to win. Make good DLC, make good games. As long as gamers get better content to play, it's fine with me. Elden Ring won Game of the Year 2 years ago, so they're not really too hurt about this, but everyone wants to win, so you know how it is. Everyone wants to compete, everyone wants the awards. But in my opinion, it sets a precedent that's going to be followed in the future, and we'll see how that goes. I don't know how it's going to go. I do think more DLCs are going to come out with bigger budgets, because now they're not expected to, but they can be nominated for Game of the Year. And the first one, if a game breaks through and wins Game of the Year as a DLC, there we go. All that money they will feel has been worth it. I don't know what game will be able to do it. You know, Elden Ring is going to be right back at it again next year with their new DLC. It was already announced. And if it isn't delayed, it's going to be 2025. And it's probably going to also be eligible for Game of the Year as a nominee. Because you know how FromSoft works. From Software, their games are usually always quality and never really miss. It's been a long time since they missed. I don't even know when's the last time they missed. So on that end, FromSoft is going to be right back at it, trying to make a DLC win Game of the Year next year. The next nominee I would like to talk about is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Final Fantasy is a legendary franchise, and this also had controversy because a legendary franchise and a legendary game getting a remake eligible for Game of the Year had people upset, because they felt like basically they were using their name and their status of this franchise to be able to try to pushed their way through to a game of the year that it didn't deserve, because Final Fantasy VII, the story, the characters are from a game that was made way, way, way before the remake. But I personally do not feel like remakes should not be eligible for Game of the Year, because it's a new game. I understand it's taking old characters in an old game and bringing it to the modern era, but at the end of the day, it is a new game. So you got to treat it as such. And it was nominated and it didn't win. But Square Enix, they said the game was successful. They do want to bring the game to other platforms, because they said having Final Fantasy as a PlayStation exclusive just no longer works financially, because these AAA games, the budgets are getting out of hand. The hundreds of millions, tens of millions of dollars pouring into one game, and to get all that money back, especially for an exclusive, is getting really hard for these companies. So they're going to have to find new ways to deal with this, and who knows what they're going to do. But Square Enix, apparently, this is going to be the last PlayStation exclusive Final Fantasy, which is big news. We'll see if they follow through with that. If it really is the final one, they might have contracts to fulfill, but the way they're talking, that contract isn't going to be signed or something. Like, they're talking like it's done. Like, whatever the third part is in that Final Fantasy VII remake trilogy is not going to be a PlayStation exclusive. So there it is for them. On the other end, they did win Game of the Year from another location. It was a smaller spot. I can find it right now. Yeah, it won Game of the Year for the Grand Game Awards. So there's a positive there. they got something. They also won awards at the Game Awards. Almost all these games won multiple awards at the Game Awards, except the DLC. Sorry, Elden fans. Now to Metaphor ReFantazio. They didn't win Game of the Year, but like all the games on his list besides Elden Ring, I'm sorry, I'm not disrespecting the Elden Ring DLC, but they all won awards, and the game was a big success for Atlas, especially as a new franchise, because this new franchise, Metaphor ReFantazio, was the fastest selling Atlas game ever, and that's coming from a franchise developer group in Atlas who made a franchise like Persona that's so popular, and they reached their 5th game, and they even had Persona 4 Reloaded, and just it's insane how a new franchise from a developer that's been doing this for a while was able to just break through and be the fastest selling game in their history. It goes to show you that new franchises can also blow up. It doesn't have to be remake after sequel forever. Making new franchises might allow you to get into a new location, make new fans, or even unite fans to something new. It sucks that they weren't able to win Game of the Year. If you're a fan of Metaphor ReFantazio, you always want to win Game of the Year as a developer, but the game is a huge success, and it is what it is when you can't win it. But I wasn't able to find any other minor Game of the Years. It won at like other locations. We're not saying it's minor, but not as such a big venue like the Game Awards, unlike the other 2 games I mentioned. But won Best RPG, and the game is a massive success. So, talking about huge successes, I saved the best for last. That is Black Myth Wukong, the game that fans feel the most slighted. The developer felt extremely slighted, believed they cheated against them. This game was massive, just insane. Sold 10 million copies in 3 days. It was unbelievable how popular the game was, especially it being a new franchise from a developer that only previous game was a mobile game. I looked into it, and the studio only made a mobile game previously. And going from a mobile game to Black Myth Wukong, a AAA title that sold 10 million copies in 3 days, was massive and has a massive fan base already. And that's their first game. Whatever they make next is probably going to be better. So it sucks that they didn't win. And if it was like most impactful game of the year, like as like sales wise and most popular game of the year, they should have won it. But in the end of the day, the voters did not decide to give this game Game of the Year at the Game Awards, but they did win Game of the Year at the Golden Joysticks. They won Game of the Year, so it might not have been the Game of the Year they wanted to win, but they did win Game of the Year. So at the end of the day, Game of the Year is a Game of the Year, even though it's not the same level. They can still put that in the accolades of the game. So Black Myth Wukong fans are just gonna, this is just gonna be something that they're not gonna give up on. They have the right to not want to give up on it. They feel like it should have won Game of the Year. They should never try to feel like their game wasn't the biggest game of the year, because it technically was the biggest game of the year, just didn't win the award. So Game Science and their developers, hopefully they come back with a bigger game next year. Not next year, a bigger game in a future year, and it can win Game of the Year. There's always another shot. It sucks for the fans, sucks for all those people that wanted it to win, but it wasn't able to get away with it. But Game Science is known now. They know. Everyone knows them. Black Myth Wukong, everyone knows that franchise now. They have staying power. They have a name. They'll be back. This does lead me to say, before I get into Astro Bot, is I wish we was able to see the voting statistics, because the voting statistics, similar to like in a sport, they would show you how many people voted for a certain athlete or player to win MVP. Maybe we don't need the names, because some sports, they actually have the name and the person they voted attached to it, because some people, gaming industry is a little bit toxic sometimes. You don't want people to know you voted for them. But I feel like it would be good to see a percentage, to see, all right, this was who was in second, who was in third, because it would be good for those developers and everyone who made the game to see how far they got and how close they got to winning Game of the Year. Now we're on to the final topic of the video, and Astro Bot, and why I believe gaming needed Astro Bot to win Game of the Year. The reason why is simple to me. I don't believe there has ever been a non-Nintendo traditional platformer to ever win Game of the Year. If it's not a Nintendo game and it's a platformer, there's nothing that has even been close. I'm not even sure they've ever even been nominated. So for Astro Bot to break through and not just be nominated, but win Game of the Year as a platformer, a 3D platformer in 2024, is insane. Absolutely insane. And they praised Nintendo, they praised the Super Mario franchise when they won the award. But this leads me to believe it wasn't a AAA game. This is one thing that needs to be said. It wasn't a massive budget. I think they called it a AA game. But the game won Game of the Year. A AA game. But it actually probably sold the least, or the second least, out of all these nominees. It sold 1.5 million at the time of this recording. The only game that might have sold less is Metaphor ReFantazio. I can't find the sales data right now. It says 1 million, but I haven't got anything more than that, because it sold 1 million in a day. Metaphor ReFantazio, that is. So I can't find any more data on that, but it's not one of the best-selling games, but it's still won Game of the Year. And the reason why I think this is important is because now these companies, Sony, Microsoft, they need to start developing AA games, because they can't just keep making AAA titles. It's too expensive. It's getting out of hand, and they're having to do layoffs and all of this, because each game has such a big budget they're making, and if one game fails, that's it. All the developers got to pack their bags. They got to get out of there. So like putting all your eggs into one basket is absolutely insane, especially when the one basket doesn't reach wherever they want it to go, whatever sales figure they want it to reach. Everyone has to get hit with the chopping block. Maybe give them some benefit of the doubt. Let them make some AA games, try to build themselves back up before they make that big AAA game. Astro Bot was successful as a AA game. Let's see if they make another one, a sequel, Astro Bot 2. But is the sequel going to be AA or is it going to be AAA? We don't know. It probably doesn't have to be AAA, because I don't know what the extra budget would do, and the game was still successful as AA Game of the Year level. Moving on to Xbox, they have a platformer they've been keeping in the vault for what feels like 20 years. They made a little game called Nuts and Bolts. It's called Banjo-Kazooie. They got Banjo-Kazooie from Rare, and the last platforming game, unless you count Nuts and Bolts as a platformer, I don't really know what that even counts as. They've never made a platforming Banjo-Kazooie game. They have Banjo-Kazooie. They see Astro Bot win Game of the Year. I'm a Banjo-Kazooie fan. Make a new Banjo and Kazooie. It's been too long. You've seen Astro Bot win Game of the Year. Banjo-Kazooie is a known franchise. Put the money into it, get the developers into it, and make a new Banjo-Kazooie. Astro Bot was successful. A new Banjo-Kazooie can be successful. So, gaming needed this to win so they can put their money out of all AAA games and make some AA games. That's the main reason of it. They need to decrease the budgets, similar to what Nintendo's doing, because Nintendo makes a lot of AA games that are successful, insanely successful, even though the budgets aren't high. They made the Zelda spin-off where Zelda's the playable character. They made some other budget games like Switch Sports. A lot of people hate Switch Sports, but the game is very successful. And they even make so much AA games and it allows them to fill in the gaps. AA, and then they throw out their AAA Zelda, their AAA Mario, Super Smash Brothers, Mario Kart, but you need something to mix it up. You need some appetizers. You can't just all have main courses. And hopefully this is what Astro Bot shows, that even an appetizer, disrespectful, let me not call it an appetizer, but a game with an appetizer budget can win Game of the Year.